She hung there like a trapped animal, her wrists and ankles stretched wide by coarse ropes. Her dress was ripped, her face smeared with dirt, sweat, and humiliation. The fierce midday sun of a small Kansas town beat down on her skin, threatening to burn it raw. Clara Evans was only 22, and she had no strength left to cry out. Only a faint, hoarse whisper escaped her dry lips each time the ropes pulled tighter on her shoulders. She had been left in the open plains to suffer, to break. A hot wind moved through the tall grass, bringing no relief. The wooden frame holding her groaned with every gust, as if taunting her. Her toes barely touched the ground. Every moment felt like it could be her last. Clara had known there would be punishment for taking money from Sheriff Harlan Reed, but she never thought it would be this. She expected a jail cell, not to be strung up like a public warning to anyone who broke the town's laws. Her breathing was weak and shallow. Then came the sound of horse hooves, slow and steady, coming closer from behind a hill. A rider appeared through the heat waves. Thomas Grant, a rancher in his late 40s, with a weathered face and calm, kind eyes. He was a man who had seen hard times, both in nature and in people. He stopped his horse and stared at the young woman hanging in the sun. First came shock, then anger, then a deep sadness. He walked closer. Clara lifted her head with what little strength she had. She thought he might be there to hurt her more. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Please, don't." Thomas froze, not because of her words, but because of the fear and hopelessness in her voice. He reached for the ropes. She flinched, expecting pain, but he carefully studied each knot, each bruise, each mark on her body. In that moment, you knew one thing clearly. No matter what she had done, this was wrong. He pulled out his knife. The plains were quiet. The sun burned hotter. Clara hung between life and death, while a stranger made a choice that would change everything. The knife flashed in the sunlight. Then he cut the ropes. Clara fell like a heavy sack. Thomas caught her before she hit the ground. She gasped, air rushing painfully into her lungs. Her legs gave out completely. If he had arrived just minutes later, she might not have survived. He gently lifted her, one arm behind her back, the other under her knees, and carried her away from that terrible frame. He laid her in the shade of a small tree, gave her water in slow sips, and waited until her eyes could focus again. Up close, she didn't look like a criminal. She looked like a frightened young woman with a strong chin and eyes that still held fight in them. "I took money," she whispered, "from Sheriff Reed's office. I opened his safe and stole it." Thomas said nothing at first. So she really was a thief. The sheriff hadn't lied about that. He helped her onto his horse and climbed up behind her so she wouldn't fall. As they rode, her head rested against his shoulder. He could feel her shaking. "You know stealing is wrong," he said quietly. "The law had a right to punish you." "A jail cell," she replied weakly. "Not this. Not left to die in the sun." That quieted him for a long time. They followed the river as the sun began to set. Thomas believed in the law. This land needed it to stay civilized. But what he had seen today wasn't law. It was cruelty. When they reached his small ranch, he carried Clara inside and laid her on his bed. He brought water and clean cloth strips and gently cleaned the burns on her wrists and ankles. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll take you to town. You'll face a judge, but in a courtroom, not tied up like an animal." Clara stared at the ceiling. There was more she wanted to say, something much darker than stealing. But she stayed silent. For now, she would just be a thief who got lucky. And he would be the man who couldn't walk away from someone in pain. Far away, a rider began asking questions about the girl who had disappeared from the sheriff's rope. The next morning started peacefully. Too peacefully. Thomas was up early, feeding the horses and checking the land. He tried not to think about the young woman sleeping in his bed while he took the old cot near the stove. His plan was simple. Take her to town, stand with her in court, let real justice happen. That plan ended when 3 riders came fast up the dirt path. Sheriff Harlan Reed arrived with 2 deputies, dust flying behind them. His cold eyes scanned the ranch before locking onto Thomas.
"Morning, Grant," the sheriff said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Looks like someone cut down my thief." Thomas didn't lie. "I found a young woman left to die in the sun. I brought her here so she wouldn't. That's all." "You interfered with the law," the sheriff said, voice hard now. "She belongs in my jail." Thomas shook his head. "She belongs in a courtroom. What you did wasn't right." For a moment, the 2 men just stared, one a rancher, the other wearing a badge. This was the kind of moment that showed who a man really was. Inside the house, Clara stood barefoot behind the door, listening to every word. Fear gripped her. She knew that voice. She knew if the sheriff took her back, there would be no trial, just a quiet end. When Thomas came back inside, his face was tight with anger. "He wants to take you," he said. "He says what he did was legal." Clara looked at him. Really looked at him. This man had already risked everything once. If she stayed quiet, he would keep trying to help her, and they might both end up dead. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Thomas, I did steal, but I stole something he never should have had, and I saw what he did to get it." Thomas stared at her. "What did you see, Clara?" She took a deep breath. Once she told him, there would be no turning back. "I was cleaning his office late one night," she began, eyes on the floor. "A man came in, a messenger from the express company, carrying a heavy bag. They argued about money that was supposed to go on the train, but never did. Then I heard a gunshot. Just one. The man fell. The sheriff stood over him like it was nothing. He wrapped the body in a tarp and took it out of town, down by the river. That bag went into his safe. That's what I stole. I thought I was taking from a greedy man. I didn't know I was taking from a dead man." The room went still. Thomas had known bad men before, cattle thieves, drifters. But a sheriff murdering for money and then trying to silence a witness? That was different. "If we stay here," Clara said quietly, "he'll come back. And this time, no one will find us." Thomas looked out the window, then made his choice. "We're going to Fort Riley," he said. "The soldiers there work with the railroad. They'll listen. The sheriff doesn't control them." By evening, they were riding hard west, following the river. Clara sat in front of Thomas on the horse, still weak but holding on. Behind them, on a distant hill, Sheriff Reed watched them go. He knew if they reached the fort, everything was over for him. He turned to his deputies. "We ride. Now." 3 armed men began the chase. Night fell as Thomas and Clara saw the lights of Fort Riley ahead. Behind them, hoofbeats grew louder. At the fort gate, a soldier stepped out with a rifle and shouted for them to stop. Thomas pulled the horse hard. Just then, the sheriff and his men arrived, breathing hard, badges shining. Everyone started shouting at once.
"She's a thief," the sheriff yelled. "That man is helping her escape."
Thomas got down slowly and pulled the stolen leather bag from under his coat. He dropped it at the soldier's feet. "That belongs to the express company," he said. "Their rider never made it. She knows why." All eyes turned to Clara. She slid off the horse and stood beside Thomas. Her legs shook, but her voice was clear. She told them everything: the argument, the gunshot, the body taken away in the night. The soldiers didn't choose sides quickly. They took statements. They sent a telegram. They waited. Days later, word came back. A messenger and his money had vanished weeks ago. Soldiers rode to the town with Thomas and Clara protected among them. They dug by the river where Clara said to look. They found bones, torn cloth, and a metal tag from the express company. Sheriff Harlan Reed was arrested and taken away in chains. Months later, he faced a judge far from his town and lost. Thomas and Clara rode home together, no longer strangers. Clara worked on the ranch to repay what she had taken, and more. She learned to rope calves, not people. On quiet evenings, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, saying little, at peace. Sometimes real justice only comes because one person refuses to look away from suffering. Sometimes the one called a criminal is the only one brave enough to speak the truth. If you had seen Clara hanging that day, would you have cut her down, even knowing trouble would follow? Have you ever had to choose between staying safe and doing what's right? If this story touched you, please like and subscribe so more people can hear it. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are? And where are you reading this from?